From New Jersey, this is Low Fidelity. I'm Jeff Heller.
And I'm Mike Labrie. On this episode, we will be discussing Low Fidelity, who we are, what we're doing, and why you should listen to us.
So it has been 7 years, Mike, since the last episode.
Yes.
If you were an old listener of Low Fidelity from our run was 2008 to 2010.
From the Brad days. From the Mike days.
Right. The Brad days in 2007, the Mike and I days, Mike and me days. From 2008 to 2010. Welcome back. We are here.
You've been talking about doing this for a while now, and it's really exciting to actually, like you said, be in this chair and speaking these words to you.
We'll give you a quick update as to what we've been doing, but I just wanted to first apologize to people for the sort of fading away of the version 2 of the podcast. Thank you for your support. We've had a number of people reach out to us on our Twitter handle, to emails, to just people telling us in comments of our other projects that they've been looking forward to this coming back.
I occasionally still get that, hey, what happened to Low Fidelity? You guys going to do that again? And that was one of those where it was like, actually, Mark.
It's astonishing that that's happened. And really, we truly thank you from the bottom of our hearts for doing that, because that is exactly why we are back here to do this again in a slightly different format, but we will get to that discussion a little bit later. For those of you who are new to this podcast, or maybe you've been listening to episodes in the future and want to come back and see what we're all about, welcome to Low Fidelity. I happen to be a huge fan of music, so
and you and I like talking with each other about music.
Yes.
So it works out well.
It absolutely does. That is exactly what we do here. But I do want to mention quickly about who we are as individuals, why we're doing this. I think the first way to start this discussion is to kind of talk about what our tastes in music are, especially because in the original, I had a more indie rock, classic rock, electronic experimental taste, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I would dabble in other genres like hip hop or pop or jazz, but I wasn't really focusing in specifically on certain albums. I would hear things and I would listen to them, but I wouldn't really do any more than just kind of glance at those other genres. In the 7 years since the previous version of Low Fidelity, I've kind of changed the way that I would listen to music, or what I would choose to listen to, where I've kind of gone off of a number of different sources like word of mouth or critical acclaim. If something has a large community around it, if there's a lot of fans around it, then that's something that I felt I should listen to. And so regardless of genre, that's basically the kind of music that I've been focusing on.
Yeah, you occasionally surprise me. You're like, hey, I was listening to blank huge pop album. Like, I never really pegged you for that, but of course, yeah, like that's monumental. You should probably be listening to that. Yeah, tell me about it.
Right. So, and it could be something as popular as maybe, well, I'm going to quote some popular artist of today that's going to be out of touch next year. But
and Jeff, that's really a growth thing. I was just listening to another podcast who were talking about this, where it's, okay, that was 7 years ago. And every 7 years, you really kind of become a different person.
Yes.
It's so easy now in our mid-30s. We'll date ourselves here. You think about and you just consume things that you probably wouldn't have 7, 14, 21 years ago, because in all those phases of your life, you're rejecting something, you're rebelling against something you don't really have a reason to rebel against, but you don't think it's cool enough. And I think in your mid-30s, you're pretty comfortable in your own skin that, sure, I'm going to listen to Taylor Swift. I'm going to listen to Radiohead. I'm going to listen to, someone banging on some pots and pans. It's totally fine.
Yep, exactly. And it's nice because the adage, I think, is that as you get older, your taste in music tends to shrink.
Yeah.
And so, let's get that time in to explore everything else before that actually happens.
You want to fight against that as you continue growing too.
Exactly right. And I think the best way to do it is really just to talk about the stuff that you enjoy and to share that with other people. About myself, just to kind of finish up, I have some things to plug. I am currently an editor at Genius. Genius.com is a website where people can annotate music lyrics. And I was a moderator back when it was Rock Genius, and when it switched over into Genius. I was just recently, as of, I think, this month, lowered down to editor, just because the role of a moderator now is like you have to be part of the community and you have to... Meanwhile, I'm just there to edit lyrics. Like, I just want to put in meanings to songs. I don't really care to talk to other people. That's not true. There were a lot of people there that were really awesome, but I don't have the time to really commit to that role. So as an editor, I think it's still a huge honor, and I love putting a lot of stuff on that website. And you're going to hear a lot of those things that I annotate there showing up here. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I've also submitted a lot of things to whosampled.com. I have a profile on Last.fm. Rate Your Music. I write some reviews on there, and I'm a huge database nerd. I haven't shown Mike my database yet, but I've built one for my music collection.
I've heard so much about it.
Yeah, and a lot of what I'm doing in that database actually fuels what we're doing here in this podcast. So I think, unlike before where I would be doing album reviews based on critical review, the way that we would pick albums previously was just like word of mouth or things we were looking forward to. This time around, it has more to do with what the database is telling me I should be doing. I kind of have this automated process running our system here, but I'll get into more detail in a little bit.
What was music like in your household growing up?
Oh.
Were your parents into music? Did they play a lot of music around the house? How do you think that shaped you and your musical appreciation?
My answer is going to be so cynical. So, so music was always there, essentially, because my mom would, she was into classic rock, although I never really heard that part of her. I'd always listened to adult contemporary stuff in the 90s in the car, or in the 80s too. She would start to sing some of that, and I would immediately shush her from doing it. I just hated when people I knew sang for some reason. I don't know.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, it was kind of harsh. But and to be even more harsh, my dad would listen to smooth jazz, which would drive me and my sister crazy. Yeah, we weren't really the nicest of kids when it came to listening to music, but it was really because we would grow up to define our own taste, which was so unlike what our parents were listening to. I reference my sister a lot because she really informed a lot of what my musical taste is. And it's really because of her that I was kind of given a direction, whereas a lot of people kind of find their own way. She was giving me all of the stuff that she was listening to, and she had gotten into music a lot earlier than I did.
Right.
She was listening to Tool and Dark Side of the Moon and all these really influential pieces of music in her teens. And it was really only until I got to college that I was really starting to pay attention.
And that's definitely one of the differences between you and I is you have an older sibling. I am the oldest sibling.
You're the influencer.
Right. So yeah, my youngest sister, I would give her some of my older pop CDs and stuff. This is what I was listening to when I was your age. I think that is a huge influence for a lot of people, is the older sibling handing them down the mixtape or even the zine or something like that, or the old tape, the old record.
Well, now what is it? Like they hand you a blog, or?
I don't know how that works anymore, just what you're playing around the house. So for me, there really was no music in the household. As I think back on being a young kid, yeah, I guess someone would play a song every once in a while, but music was never a part of my youngest childhood. So to me, the discovery of music was just the generic top 40 radio station as I was like 8, 9, 10 years old. I constantly say that I think the best year in music is 1992. So I was 10 years old at that point. I love everything about 91 to 93. 92 is just like, oh, everything's perfect right in there. So my early 90s pop music trivia is kind of off the charts. That's what I feel really shaped me. And what I loved about that era, the early 90s were still the 80s in many ways, but there was also a really big rebellion against that. Pop music was definitely changing. Rock music was definitely changing. And I think I was unconsciously learning that through the top 40 radio station somehow.
But like good timing, really, right?
Yeah.
Because we were both born 1982, or were you 1983? No, you were 82. Yeah. So, right. So when it was 92, we both were 10.
Yeah.
There was a huge shift. Nirvana was 91. Grunge was taking over all the standard pop stuff. I think we were losing a lot of the production techniques of the late 80s.
And think about what else there was. It wasn't just the radio, but MTV was enormous at that point.
At that point, ubiquitous with the music video, definitely.
Right. And we're going to talk about that with the album review that we'll be doing at some point in the near future or near past. I don't really know how that flows.
I'll explain that too.
The ebb and the flow of our episode. So that was my kind of like early definition of music in my life, was the top 40 stuff at the cusp of the 90s there. And that doesn't really, it informed the shape of things to come, but doesn't really inform my musical tastes now. I am probably what you would consider like the cliche, got in through the pop punk, moved into the emo, went backwards into the emo a little bit, came forward alongside all the, what was that, third wave ska? I don't really know what wave that would have been at that point, but I was all along New England and the East Coast in my high school years. So I was kind of like pulling in all these little bits and pieces here and there. And then I ultimately landed in New Jersey, and the emo scene in New Jersey at my point in late high school and college,
critical mass,
was the peak of everything. And that point in time, that's what defines Mike in music, is New Brunswick in 99, 2000 for sure.
We enjoy each other's company, obviously, because we've done this before and, we're friends to this day, of course, but it just shows how interesting and how different our tastes are, because you really did follow a scene at its peak in the exact right place to be.
Yeah.
I mean, Rutgers was huge with that scene going into the early 2000s.
I missed being like building mates with Midtown by like a year. Like it was just at that time. It was,
But then in contrast to myself, I've been basically not attaching to any particular scene. I've kind of been sort of floating from one thing to the next, whatever seems to capture my attention, whatever people are saying is the next new thing. That's what I've been hopping onto. So it's a relatively different mindset where you have a community that you're really a part of. Meanwhile, in my case, I'm sort of just floating across different places.
Yeah, you were the genre floater. I wouldn't say I was a scene kid in 2000, but probably approaching it in some ways. Relaunching the podcast here, really, it's good timing for me because this year, a lot of old favorite bands have put out a combination of surprising but also comfort food albums for me, which has been really nice. And I've also made some new discoveries. So you and I are big podcast fans, obviously, in addition to making podcasts, listen to a lot of podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
I have a long commute. I listen to a lot of podcasts. That was a huge hit to my musical enjoyment as I was no longer listening to 2 or 3 albums a day in solidarity in the car. It shifted over to podcasts. That's shifting a little bit back now. There are some mornings like, do I want to listen to a show? Do I want to listen to an album? It's not half and half anymore, but it's starting to shift toward album again.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, that is a perfect segue to what I would like to call the mission statement, which is the goal of why we're doing this again.
Yes. You got to have a purpose. You got to have a point. I mean, it's great to have fun and, you and I enjoy talking to each other regardless, but if we're going to do a show, kind of yearn to do more with it.
I agree. And this is a good opportunity for me to explain what has been happening in the past 7 years of trying to figure out how to redo the show. For our new listeners, you'll have to kind of excuse us as we kind of go through some of the back history of what the show used to be, but we will get to some of the new stuff shortly. But I do want to mention that we originally were something of like your general music review show where there would be an album review as the main focus, but there would be a discussion of some kind of topic. There would be a top 5. There would be a poll that we would do. And simply put, it just started to become too much and so hard to do on a 2-week basis, especially when you have lives and those lives are evolving.
We're trying to keep up with some current albums at the same time, like, this is coming out this month, let's review that. And then eventually we started mixing in things like favorite album trades to kind of give a little buffer in there, but also do more of that personal enjoyment. It's this means something to me. What can I do with this? Well, I can tell people the how and the why of my enjoyment. I get a lot out of that. And I think you were trying to incorporate it there amidst everything else you were trying to do with the show as well. And I think that's what you're trying to pull out of those old shows is that personal enjoyment, but also the historical context and just everything that would make an album so important.
It's funny. My favorite word used to be context, and you're the one who says it first this time around,
I know.
not me. So I appreciate that. And it's funny you bring that up because when you say it in that way, the mission statement for this current version of Low Fidelity isn't really all that different from the previous one. I'm going to read it from what I have written down, and that is, our goal is to encourage appreciation of diverse music through empathy, analysis, and discussion. We have these albums that are acclaimed in some way, linking directly to my taste in music now, basically, where I'll just follow wherever the trends happen to be or where historically albums have gotten a lot of praise. Looking at those albums, thinking of them critically, where did they come from? What influenced them? What brought them about? What kind of social environments were they written in? So kind of diving deep into the genesis of these pieces of work. And from that, gaining an appreciation for that type of music and then hopefully expanding it into other forms.
And where I want to interject there is I don't want to call myself strictly the color commentator during these episodes, but the deep history is definitely your thing. I think there is great value in having someone who may not know everything there is to know about something, but still getting that very honest opinion of it. I think you can't exclusively have that newbie perspective. I think you need to have that expert perspective and historical context alongside it. That's what I like about how you and I approach things is generally you have the album, you have the context, you have the history. Honestly, you just know more about it than I do.
Let's also bring in the point that apart from trying to gain an appreciation for different types of music, the fact of the matter is it is a lot easier to listen to whatever kind of music you want to listen to. These music subscription services that really don't cost that much allowing you to have an access to a library that is in the millions. You can't possibly listen to an entire collection, or at least be able to understand that entire collection, because there's just too much to go through. And so how do you know what is worth listening to through that whole? And I mean, I know that sounds kind of arrogant, I guess is the word, where it's like, oh, if I have, this access to this whole collection, let me pick out just the best ones, right? Yeah. But at the same time, there are albums there that probably communicate a different culture, different lifestyle, or different background than what you're used to, and you could really benefit from. I actually want to bring up a quote that I heard from one of my favorite YouTube series called Crash Course. And Crash Course, if you haven't heard of it, is produced by this guy, John Green. He wrote The Fault in Our Stars, the one that they moved the movie out of. They do all different kinds of things. They do world history, they do literature, and specifically in the literature episodes, in the first one, John Green basically says that people read literature because they are able to understand a different culture, or they're able to read something from a time period that comes from before them. It's something recorded that can go forward in time, whereas they themselves do not.
Right.
And so I feel music does do that in the same way, especially
totally.
Now that recording it is so much easier than, back when Edison had the wax molds. I mean, so let's discuss how this new format is going to work. The idea behind it is that we're going to have 2 episodes come out every month. And so one of them is going to be a discussion like this one here. We are talking about the new version of Low Fidelity. That is our discussion episode for the month, hopefully September, fingers crossed. And the second episode will be the review. This particular month, what we plan to do for the review is Michael Jackson's Thriller. And we wanted to do that as an opening episode because, well, first of all, it is the greatest selling album of all time.
Jeff, like I said earlier, it's Thriller. I also think it's a great choice. It's as old as we are to the year. And I think that's a good point. Like, that album dropped. Mike and Jeff dropped. So
right.
That album has been a part of our entire waking lives.
Yes. Yes. In fact, it has pretty much influenced our early childhood because it was spammed on the radio constantly with the amount of singles that were coming from it. So it's a great starting episode for us because, it certainly ties into where we're coming from, but it's also going to be very interesting to kind of go back and look at it from a different perspective, whereas we've always heard it on the radio. We know they're pop songs, but let's actually look into what do the lyrics mean? Where did the music come from? What is Quincy Jones doing in the production? That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Why did it become a hit? And I'm really looking forward to that discussion.
And everyone's had those conversations before, and I'm not entirely sure what it is that we, especially me, myself, Mike, am going to be able to add to that. But again, I think it's worth trying to do. And I also think it's a great album to start with. Again, think of the number of singles off that album. Think of how well you know that album. Without
right.
really, I was listening to it the other day. I'm like, I don't actually need to review this album. I could talk about it right this second if I had to. So I think that's another reason why it's a great choice to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. So that will be our new format, basically, where we have a review and a discussion episode per month. They're going to be released separately, but they will reference each other. And we may be doing this one first. We may be doing Thriller first. We'll see when it actually gets up on the internet. With every episode, we do encourage discussion on everything we talk about. We are more than happy to get feedback from you. We will mention specifically how to give that feedback at the end. I do want to mention first that a lot of this discussion is going to take place on Reddit. We do have a new subreddit that has been reserved for the podcast, and it is simply low_fidelity. And so the full address is reddit.com/r/low_fidelity. So feel free to join the conversation there. Don't worry if you forget the underscore. I've reserved that too. It'll send you over to the one with the underscore. But we look forward to doing a lot of stuff over there on that platform. I'm looking at hopefully reviving the poll because I think the poll was a really fun part of the show. It would be really cool if we could integrate that feature.
I actually just want to interject a little bit here.
All right.
With how much has changed since the last time we tried doing the show. The iPhone was still relatively new.
We had to worry about the edge noise showing up in recordings and had to go airplane mode before every recording. Remember that?
We probably still should, but we don't, but it's fine.
Oh, I did. Don't worry. I need my battery life.
I actually want to give a little anecdote here. It's not that really exciting of a product, but the Amazon Echo Dot, I actually got in the other day on they had the Audible promotion making it show up as free. So I did the free 1-day shipping. I got my free Echo Dot. I mentioned this on Twitter. I'm a little bit concerned about the government and Amazon listening in to everything I say, but I can walk in the house and say, and I'm not going to say it because I'm going to set off someone's device right now. I just had someone set off my phone with Siri the other day, so I'm not going to do it on the podcast here. But Alexa, play 90s R&B, and it connects to my Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen, and it just starts playing whatever I want to hear. I can say, play this artist. I can say, shuffle this genre. That kind of technology has been around for a while, but it's mature now.
Streamlined, yeah.
You can just walk into your house, say 3 words, and your entire house is filled with whatever music you want. And those are those moments where you realize, oh, it's actually the year 2017.
That is for sure. Why don't we then take it over to our next topic, which is how our albums are selected. The main idea behind how we choose the albums we're going to review is going to be very different from how we used to do it. It does tie in directly with my taste in music. Really, it's the idea of this thing gets a lot of acclaim. Apparently, it's very influential. Let's take a look at exactly how influential it is and what about it makes it so special.
Yeah, there's a value in popularity. I mean, you think back to kind of the cusp of the 2000s there with boy bands and the American pop idols. Yeah, that was kind of disposable pop music, but there was also value in seeing how that arose, why some of those songs were so pervasive, who are the people that actually wrote those songs. Oh, they came from doing this before, and then they moved on to doing this. I really do think there's value in analyzing that. So yeah, we may do Thriller, and then we're not going to, but it may be Baby One More Time the next month that we...
Never say never, Mike. Never say never. You plant that seed, it might grow.
Check that spreadsheet now. See what I rated things.
I should mention actually that, what we did do before even coming to this recording, like I said, before I had a database that I've been building with my collection and kind of putting stuff into, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a sec. But first, we had a Google sheet that we both shared between us with the list of albums that I had originally written down. And we were both putting in our takes on how often we would listen to it, not what we thought of it.
Right.
But how often we listened to it.
You had a couple comments. It was like, are you familiar with it at all? If so, then on a scale of 1 to 10, how often do you listen to it?
And I think that really
was really neat.
It was a neat experiment, and it actually really helped to kind of see what would be the right order of things. Mm-hmm. Looking at that list, I have a much easier time, at least for me, seeing, okay, we're doing this album now, we should do this one next, or, this one looks like, hey, we both know this would be an interesting conversation. Let's look at it from that angle. So that kind of influences how the albums are going to show up in this order. Also, I'm still toying with the idea of focusing on a particular artist, especially if that artist has multiple albums that have done well or are highly acclaimed or are influential, either doing them sequentially or not doing them together. Let's say we have one album from this artist here, and then a few months we do another album from them.
Well, there may be a case where an artist, they only did 2 albums and they were done after that. And then, well, why would you separate it out? You might as well talk about the entire career all in one discussion.
Exactly. So we may follow that way as well. But we'll see. I mean, this is all something that's dynamic and we can change it as we go along. But that kind of gives you an idea as to how we select the albums that we review on the show. Let's now break down exactly what we're looking at when it comes to reviewing an album. The first thing that I think is important when we talk about music is who the artist is. And so that's breaking down what culture they're from, how old are they, when were they born, what circumstances were they living through. Is there anything in that information that then can influence our opinion of the music? Not so much the opinion, but rather what we stand to gain from listening to that music.
Yeah, the music can, should, and does stand on its own. But I keep saying this. I also think there's great value in understanding everything that went into creating that piece of art.
Thriller's interesting in this way because it's really from the perspective of someone who is already famous.
Right.
And already tabloid
had a very
heavy.
Specific goal for that album, too.
Right, exactly. So that is totally going to influence how we look at Thriller compared to just listening to it on the radio and not having much cognizance, especially at 0 years old of who this person is. Now, this kind of goes into how my database works, and I'm kind of geeking out, of course, as I talk about this, but the first section of things that I put in when it comes to data that revolves around an album is what I call required listening. And so the idea behind this is what other pieces of music were out prior to the release of this album, what music inspired this album. Maybe this is like an album that began a genre. So what was there before this came out that would lead to this product? So inspirations for the artist, of course. And what did the artist do before this particular album, if there was something released beforehand? Michael Jackson is a good reference for this because he has a couple albums before this.
He had a career before his career.
Right, exactly. He was Jackson 5. He has albums of his when he was a kid, and then Off the Wall, which was a pretty great album before Thriller. A really good reason to get into that. The idea behind required listening is, and we will share this on the show, of course, if you have not heard this album yet, you may want to actually listen to these pieces of music first before attempting to listen to this. Yeah. And that is especially useful for all of our younger viewers out there who may not have the historical context behind the music that we talk about. And so if you really want to join the conversation, it's a really good idea to see what the historical sense of the album is before even getting into it itself.
Yeah, I mean, you and I, we'll take the drive-by comments. We want paragraphs. I mean, that's how you and I got, is we want to have long, detailed, thoughtful discussions about this stuff. We are ready to get in the thick with people about all these points.
Exactly. And the best way to do that is to understand the history of something and then going into the thing itself. So that's then going to take us over to this thing called obsessions. And I am obsessed with obsessions. The idea is that when you listen to something that you really enjoy or something that stands out to you, for me anyway, it's not like a passing thing. I don't get interested in something and then leave it alone. I go back to it and I look at what it is about this thing that I find so interesting.
Yeah.
And everything that we listen to is going to have that because, like I said, these are acclaimed, these are well-known albums. So there's something about it that draws people to it. And it could be a lyric, it could be something in the music, and it could be a theme that takes over, or meta information, if you will, that revolves around an album. So we will be looking at specific lyrics and kind of dissecting what those lyrics mean. I have actually been doing a little bit of education in music theory. So hopefully I can bring some of that into a discussion. And I really, fingers crossed, hope I do it well because music theory is a very contentious area of study. And so I really want to make sure that I represent that well. But I do feel like that is really important to get into when it comes to discussing music because knowing about the circle of fifths is pretty much as elemental as like the rule of thirds in photography.
So what was your experience with music itself, either playing or analyzing? I did all the elementary school stuff. Recorders and whatnot. I started playing saxophone in middle school, and I kept that up a little bit into high school. I had a little bit of the self-reflection. What do I want to do with music in high school? I don't want to just keep doing band. And then I ended up at a high school that didn't actually have band. So I started doing private lessons for a while. That's when ska was getting really big again. It's like, well, I want to play fun music, but I'm too young to be in a band. And I just kind of dropped it. But I wouldn't say I was great, but, for a middle high school kid, I was pretty good at the saxophone, Jeff.
Nice. I believe it.
And then my mom sold it without telling me. So I no longer have my saxophone.
No.
I think she donated it to like a school program that needed instruments or whatever. So.
Yeah. Well, anyway. That's a good cause. Yeah.
Right. But occasionally I really miss it. I would buy sheet music for popular songs that I enjoyed at the time. And I would transcode it, I guess, from the vocal to, whatever notes were appropriate for the saxophone and try to learn the background music to stuff. It was an obsession. I want to know the ins and outs of this song. How can this instrument tie into the song, even though it was never a part of it? But I dropped that back in high school, and I really haven't had any more deep dives into music since then, and I kind of miss it. So how about you? What was your deep dive into the world of music analysis or playing?
For a little bit of history, I took piano lessons for 2 years, maybe 3 years. It might have been just a year, and I'm exaggerating, but
it was actually 2 weeks. But
yeah, exactly. I wasn't really good at practicing because I don't know. They would call it ADD now, but I just was like floating to many different things as a kid. So, but I did enjoy a little bit of it, even though it felt more like a chore. But I'd also done violin for I think a year or two in school as well. Both of those I dropped. I just never could really get that much interest in it. Like I was saying with my music discovery coming from my sister as a teen, and then going into college and and then really getting into it. But by the time I was actually receptive to a lot of different music, I was picking up all these different sources of electronic music, and not so much dance music, really just electronic and experimental music.
Okay.
And just kind of figuring what does that mean to perform a piece of music?
Yeah.
Or what even is the definition behind this?
What's a live performance of an electronic piece of music by a DJ? Yeah.
Yeah, that too, exactly. So it sounds so pretentious, but really, I mean, I was in art school, so I was born to be pretentious. So do bear with me. I know I can be a little heavy-handed.
Oh, Jeff, I forgot.
Yes.
My main claim to fame.
Yes.
I was the expert rock band drummer around these parts.
Oh, yes, of course. No, yeah, I mean, you're an amazing rock band drummer. I think rock band really does kind of revitalize a lot of that interest in what makes music the way it is, right? Or the magic of performing it.
I got to tell you, it was actually rock band that got me to re-look into the band Rush and have a completely new appreciation for their entire discography and realize, oh, I'm actually an 80s progressive rock fan.
Right.
I realized it. And I just want to say, not just rock band drums. I bought the Ion kit, and the everything.
Yeah.
And So just saying.
It's an excellent kit.
Just saying. Anyway.
No, it's an excellent game for really getting into music appreciation as well. But I think the way that I got into music theory was kind of understanding that theory, quote unquote, in itself is not really a hypothesis. There is a difference between a theory and a hypothesis. With a hypothesis, you're essentially just making a statement based on what you already know, some way to predict what you think is going to happen.
Looking to prove something.
Yeah. Whereas theory is more like, no, here's the math that says exactly how this thing works. Why is this the way it is? Here's exactly, and granted, doesn't necessarily mean that it's absolutely true, but it's the best explanation that you have with some kind of data that says, no, this is exactly the way it is. Here are the numbers to prove it. So music theory is kind of cool as well. And when we get into things like the circle of fifths, or we get into the devil's triad, or some other really interesting pieces of music theory, it's really going to explain a lot of why something sounds as good as it does. And just to do a little spoiler, I'm working on the structure of the chorus of Thriller and why that is so appealing. So I'm going to have that ready when we get to talk about that particular discussion. I've got some projects we'll throw in GarageBand, play it just so you can kind of hear what I'm talking about. So I'm not just, word vomiting all over.
Sure.
So this is going to be so funny like 10 years from now if we're still doing this. And it's just like, God, we were so nervous then. What?
Nervous, dumb, get everything wrong. But that's the beauty of doing this.
And he's pronouncing this thing wrong. What is he doing?
It's there for all history. You make history at the same time.
Exactly.
I love it.
And anytime we get something wrong, of course, you are welcome to criticize us on our subreddit or by email. That's why we ask for feedback. We don't mind being criticized. Let's move on. Those are the obsessions. That is a huge part of what we're going to talk about.
Is that what we're still talking about?
We were talking about obsessions that whole time. Yes. We're going to move on. We also want to look at what are some of the other external elements of an album. And that comes down to how does the track listing work? Is this was this order of tracks good, or did we feel that the pacing didn't work well?
I'm a big fan of album track list order.
If you listen to the old episode, well, you can't, but I mean, if you could listen to the old episodes, you would hear that a good half of them, we were really focusing on the listing of the tracks and going, well, we thought the pacing of this was kind of off because this should have been there.
Yeah.
It got too slow here. It got too quick there. And because these are great albums, supposedly they have really good track lists. We're going to debate that as we get into it, of course, but that is certainly something we're going to look at. I, of course, love to talk about cover art, so that's going to be a big thing
me too. I'm one of those people where my loft is records up on the wall.
We'll definitely talk about production, what happens behind the scenes, who is running the knobs, essentially, what their role looks like. I do feel Thriller comes up again because of Quincy Jones.
Yeah.
We'll definitely see if there are albums that have the same personnel behind it.
And there's guests on albums. There are certainly guests on Thriller.
That's exactly right. And we get to have that argument, and hopefully a discussion for this as well later on, of why we shouldn't discredit albums that have 3,000 people working on it versus the albums that have 4 people working on it. That's definitely a big discussion. And the last point about this, just a number of different topics within this realm of metadata, is the label association. The fact that you have this album released on a label, what does that say about the label? What does it say about the album?
As someone in the emo scene in 2000, I can tell you that labels meant a lot at that time. That spoke more than the music did initially. When Drive-Thru announced that they signed Early November and Senses Fail kind of like in a row, that said, oh, okay, this is this. When Dashboard moved over to Vagrant to put out that album, that said a lot. As Vagrant was collecting all the bands around Get Up Kids and Alkaline Trio, moving on from there, that said a lot about what they wanted to do. Labels can mean more than you think they mean to a scene.
That is absolutely true. So that is going to be a pretty interesting point to talk about when we get to it as well. The next section of things is the reception, of course. So what happens when this album gets released? How is it received? How many albums does it sell? In the case of Thriller, Jesus.
And isn't that crazy now? Like, record sales, that meant something at a point in time.
Yeah, right. And it's changed completely because no one's buying, everyone's streaming. And so how does that then change the whole dynamic of what it means to buy, quote unquote, a record, right? It's not that easy anymore. And are people listening to Thriller, for example, or buying Thriller at the rate they were? No, they're streaming it, but are they streaming at the same rate that they were buying it? I'm curious to see that too. So granted, apart from how well an album sells, there's also what awards it gets. If there's any critical reception to the album, we'll certainly be taking a look at that and see if it helps or hinders our enjoyment of the album.
I want to talk about re-releases for certain albums as well. Thriller in particular, the most recent version I have, has a bunch of extra remixes and like commentary and stuff.
Ooh.
I think those are worth mentioning. Does that contribute to his legacy in any way, or was it just... Yeah, you hate to say, is it just a cash-in? Like, is there something about that album that lent it to, no, there was actually enough in the studio to kind of bring out and really add on to the legacy of this album? I'm
curious to see your thoughts on that, because the one that I'm listening to is just the standard 1983 regular edition. So we'll definitely need some perspective to see if those extra tracks really add to it. It's a very good call. But that's essentially what's going to go into our album reviews. Now, there are some other things that we'll do aside from the review, and I think this is a rather important thing to talk about when it comes to albums that you may or may not like, may or may not agree with us about. And one of those things is essentially, what wouldn't you like about this album? What is it about this particular piece of work that separates or alienates itself from maybe something else that you've listened to? There are certainly things you could say about every album or every piece of art that's out there. There's someone who's not going to like something about it.
Right. And it's not just the contrarian, I just like it because it's popular. No, there's got to be a legitimate reason in there that someone honestly has a problem with it.
That kind of gives you a sense of the undesirable elements, if you will, of an album. And so that is then going to bring us to further listening. We have reviewed this album. We've said things that we liked. We said this tiny bit of section, hopefully tiny bit, of what we didn't like. If you decide that as you're listening to it, yes, I really do like this, there's going to be some things that the artist has done themselves further down the road that we'll say is great. We may actually review that album here on the show as well. There may be some things that are more mediocre, let's say, but they're still interesting listens. We'll recommend that as well. But more importantly, let's talk about the artists who were influenced by this piece of work. That is something that I draw up with every album in my database. Of course, I have like a list of artists who have said, I've listened to this inspired me. And that is something that we're going to share with you. So that way you have a launching point. If you thought that this thing was great, what else can you listen to keep going on this trend? That is really going to fulfill our mission statement, which is let's approach music appreciation from a standpoint of, just dive into it. Let's get some context. Let's discuss all the negative, all the positive. Let's give listeners a way to move forward from that. And so hopefully the whole idea behind this is that you're going to have a great mindset to go into other genres, things you never thought you would have attempted before, and let's take it further from there. That is how we're going to do music reviews. The other thing that we're going to do on the show is the discussion. And there's not really much to say about how we're going to discuss our topics. I think it's pretty straightforward that when you have a topic and you have two people that really like talking to each other, that you're just going to basically explain all the different things about that topic. Is there really much more to be said about that?
It's pretty much going to be just you and I having conversations like we normally do, except now we're recording it and might have a little more structure to it.
And there's a pop filter in front of your face, and there's a microphone and pop filter in front of my face. The way that we are going to release these episodes, my thought was we have one at the beginning of the month and then one in the middle of the month. Mm-hmm. And in terms of which one comes first, either the review or the discussion, I think it's going to be based on whatever the topic or album is. Actually, a lot of times I think something that I think has always worked is when you have a topic that relates to the album that you're then reviewing. Mm-hmm. And so that means it could change if the discussion comes first or the review comes first, really based on what that discussion is or what that album is. So we'll see. Okay, so the last topic is how you can join the discussion. So we have a number of different ways that you can reach out to us. There is our subreddit. And again, that web address is reddit.com/r/lo_fidelity. lo-fidelity, y/r, who knows, it's Reddit. But that is going to be where we're going to post the links to new episodes. That's how you can see current discussions going on. It's really good for having discussions. Very quick to sign up as well. You don't even have to put an email address if you don't want to start off. So I think that'll encourage more people to come and give us discussions. So that is one way to reach us. But our email address is feedback@lofidelity.info. Lastly, because I got the lofidelity.info domain back, I was also able to get our Twitter handle back. So
Nice.
we are at Lo-Fi Podcast on Twitter as well. So those are 3 ways to get in contact with us and join the discussion. Mike, anything you want to add to that?
No, man, just I'm really happy that you decided that you wanted to do this again. And I've always said, whenever you're ready, I'm ready. I got a basement. I got microphones. I got the mixer. Let's go do it. I'm ready. Are you ready? I'm ready. All right, we're doing it. And now we're doing it.
I'll say I'm ready enough where I have, I had our logo done. I have our theme song done. I got the communities ready. I just don't know what I'm editing in. I don't know how I'm writing the RSS feed. There's so much that I don't know, which is hilarious.
But you know what, Jeff? That's not my problem. So I love it.
Right, exactly. This is all my responsibility now. But we do want to thank you, of course, for coming back to us. And if you're new to the show, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I truly hope, Mike, I'm sure you agree, that you were able to get from this episode a sense of how we work, what kind of mentality we put into the stuff that we talk about, and also give you, or just make you more comfortable with the way that we're releasing the show. So, of course, you're more than welcome to give us feedback on really anything about the show. If you feel that this could have a different timetable, if you would like our discussions to change, if I say something in a certain way that you think I do it incorrectly. What was that word I used to say that you told me Limp Bizkit said, Fred Durst said?
Oh, God.
No, not irregardless. It was, I never said irregardless, but I did say agreeance.
That's
what it was.
agreeance, yes.
When I would say we are in full agreeance.
Forgot about that.
I'm
God, I'm dying. That was the best.
okay. I'm sorry. I've seen the errors of my ways. I am looking to never say it again.
Related to that, I think it was one of the episodes we didn't put out. And I can't believe I did this. I misspoke the name of the Saves the Day album. Instead of saying In Reverie, I said In Revere. And I went back and listened to that. I was like, who is this monster? So that never made it out there. But anyway. Yes, we all have our problems.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's why your feedback is so critical, because we don't know that we're doing it unless you say something.
Right.
So, of course, we want to hear as much feedback as we can get. All right, Mike, do you want to finish things off?
Yeah, we're glad to be back. I'm excited to see where the show is going to go in the future. Again, your feedback is important. You mentioned the subreddit, you mentioned social media, Twitter in particular, I think is where I definitely hang out more than anywhere else.
And I don't at all.
You'll definitely see me. I'll pull you back over there.
Yep.
And the email address, feedback@lofidelity.info. We're very
correct.
excited to have you along for the ride again.
Beautiful. Next time on the show, we're going to analyze and review Michael Jackson's Thriller. Thank you for listening to Low Fidelity. We'll see you next episode.